build my gallows and build them high. Makes a long time climbing before I die. I want the chance.
Hello everybody, welcome to Longbangers. I'm joined tonight by Colin. Colin, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And also joined by special guest Graham Spiers. Graham, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm fine, Matty. Good to see you guys. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to have some Hibby chat.
Welcome back to the podcast as well. And I don't know if you would have seen much of the reaction to your last one, Graham, but it went down very, very well. So we're delighted to have you back on.
Oh, right. I normally go down very badly, so that's,
a few
that's refreshing to hear. When I say I normally go down very badly, I suppose that depends which city I'm talking about. But anyway, it's nice to hear. Or maybe which side of a city. But anyway, I'm here. And it's good to be here.
Tonight we were going to just, I suppose, tap into some of your memories and experiences of former Hibs managers. I'm sure you've got some kind of good stories to tell and some good experiences that you've had over the years. So I think to kick off with, Colin and I would have been of an age where, well, certainly when I first started going to the games, Alec Miller was in charge. Alec Miller had a sort of very dour reputation. His side had quite a dour reputation, despite him putting together a couple of really good sides in his time at Hibs. What do you remember of Alec Miller and his time at Hibs, Graham?
Well, just before I go on to Alex Miller, guys, the thing that astonishes me is that in my working life as a journalist, which is now probably 32, 33 years, there's actually been 20 Hibs managers on my watch. I've done a rough calculation. It's either maybe it's 19 managers in 32, 33 years. Now, my arithmetic is notably bad, but does that kind of ring true with you, that stat? Yeah. I think that's the case.
And I will be. And Alec Miller was there for what, 10 years as well?
Yeah.
In that period. So actually take him
I'm talking Alec Miller, Jim Duffy, Alec McLeish, Frank Sosie, Bobby Williamson, Tony Mowbray, John Collins, Mick Sue, Big Yogi, Colin Calderwood. My goodness, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Pat Fenlon, Terry Butcher, Alan Stubbs, Neil Lennon, Heck, Jack Ross, Sean Maloney, and now Lee. I think that's 19 in 32 years. That tells a story of a certain volatility, does it not?
It does.
At a football club.
And that's what we talk about, though. It's like we talk about as soon as we go on a wee bad run. What are we on now? Five
games,
or 5 out of 6 or something. And it's like sack the manager, and you almost go, can we sack the manager again? Because then, well, we've all spoken about St Johnstone, and they stick by the manager, but then and it brings a stability that we're not churning players out every January, every July, but then you could argue that they wouldn't get that time at Hibs either, would they? But so it's like it's not. It clearly doesn't work, right? We've had 2 third place finishes in that whole time as well, 3.
Yeah.
The thing I find though, guys, is that I'm the one that started this. Yes, I mean you want stability, and you want continuity, and you would think for the club to work, you would want a certain longevity with managers. But the fact is, most managers need to be binned. If it's not working, they have to be binned. Yeah. So while we want stability, I bet you if we went through that list of Hibs managers, just about all of them, we would all say, look, he had to go. It's just the way life is in football. But sorry, Matty, to come back to your original question, which I diverted from. Yeah, I mean, Alec Miller was the first guy, as a nervous young journalist, Alec Miller was the first guy I dealt with. And the word, I always remember the word I would use for him and his setting in a dimly lit room in the old Easter Road was austere. I mean, it was like, and now I like Alec Miller. I like most guys, but I like Alec Miller. But it was like going. I remember one interview I went down to see him when things were not going well for Hibs, and it was like going down to meet a very grim Presbyterian deacon, full of foreboding, joyless, full of foreboding. Hardly a smile in 40 minutes. And I've discovered over the years Alex Miller's a good guy, and he probably was a very, very knowledgeable football coach and football man. And he outlived a whole pile of Hibs managers, didn't he? That came subsequently, and he won a trophy, didn't he? So, and a couple of decent finishes. He said to me, the Hibs fans at that time were giving a really hard time to Brian Hamilton, midfielder,
Hamilton was a big
ex
blue boy.
Hibernian.
Yeah.
And Alec Miller said to me, the fans don't understand Brian Hamilton. They don't understand the role he's playing. That's the problem. I always remember him saying that. And I thought, well, I don't understand him either, because he was a functional player, wasn't he? Alec's point was he was the embroidery in the team. But I can still hear him say it, Graham, the fans don't understand what he's doing for the team.
Was he asking you to, sorry, Matthew, was he asking you to help him explain to us then, like through the newspapers, or what was he doing then? Just
no, I can't remember how the subject came up, but I think it was within the context of the flack that Alec was getting at the time, and in this rant that he came out with in answer to my question, my God, you're copying some flack. He said this. He said a number of things, and one of them is the fans don't understand what the job that Brian Hamilton does for me. Don't know why I remember that. I just do.
Hamilton was one of these players like Joe Tortolano that just would cop a load of flack for the fans. I used to go, when I first started going to Football Man, and my uncle took me at the old what was the old north stand, which is now the west stand, but the sort of north end of the west stand, and my auntie and her female friend called Terry, were particularly vocal in their defence of Brian Hamilton and Alec Miller to anybody who would voice dissent to them in the stand, and it was nearly the cause of like fights with my uncle and whoever else was nearby several times, because they wouldn't hear a word against them. When I stopped going with them, started going to the East Stand, there wasn't very many people sticking up for Brian Hamilton or Alec Miller, to be fair.
Yes. Another player I remember, now that I think about it, guys, I think maybe Alec Miller attracted or liked a certain type of pragmatic player who kind of did a slightly robotic job and got it done, like Neil Orr. Now, Neil Orr, if I remember him, came from West Ham. He must have been a decent player. He played, but he had a certain functional whipping the cross in. And I remember Alec Miller saying to me, his percentages of crosses delivered, you want to see them. The percentages of the crosses that he delivered. And I thought, well, this is a guy that kind of measures stats, and that's where the modern game's gone, but that's how he saw Neil Orr. And Neil Orr was another player that you would never call a flair player, I don't think.
No, Neil Orr definitely wasn't. Miller's team had like a right reputation for being very dour and defensive. Graham, is that something that you recognised in him?
Yeah, I think a modern equivalent is sometimes that's sometimes aimed at Derek McInnes. Willie Miller said to me, actually, in the Easter Road press box last year, I shouldn't say this, but I'll tell you. Well, no, it's more longer than that, because he was with Aberdeen. Aberdeen had gone 1-0 up, and Derek went into a very defensive shape. And Willie said to me, Derek always thinks 1-0 will be enough. And Derek actually said 2 weeks ago at Rugby Park, he loves a 1-0 victory. Can't remember the exact phrase he used in the presser, but Derek said something like, the most cherished win in football is a 1-0 win. And I think Alec Miller was a bit like that as well. I think Alec Miller thought that minimal goals scored, but you win, and that's the deal.
I think Nil-Nil did with Miller. That was the problem.
It's a good comparison, though, isn't it? Because, like, we found that with McInnes' teams when he came to Easter Road with Aberdeen. But he did have flair players in the team, like Hayes and, the wide guys he would have in the team. And Miller had Michael O'Neill and Pat McGinley and that guys that would get forward and stuff and score goals, but there was no real urgency to do it, was there? Like it was 1-0 would do sort of thing. And his derby record obviously probably hindered them more than anything, because it was terrible, wasn't it? He was there through all the 22s and all the other numbers that they get thrown at us.
Yeah. At that time, during the Alec Miller reign, I was at Scotland Sunday, and it was my first port of call as a journalist. And Kevin McCara, the brilliant late Kevin McCara, was the football correspondent. So I was the kind of young Turk that rode shotgun beside Kevin. And my fate was always to do the Edinburgh derbies. And I saw some grim games. But during that, it was the infamous Hibs couldn't lay a finger in Hearts. I mean, it was all that, you know. And I think that was a real, as you guys have mentioned, that must have been a nail in the coffin of Alec Miller. Just to round off the Derek McInnes thing, I do think Derek wouldn't say this way, but I do think Derek is probably a modern day lover of Catenaccio and the old Italian 1960s shutting up shop and cherishing 1-0, the most beautiful feat in football, to win 1-0. Derek's got a bit of that in him, and I think Alec probably had that as well. Derek's argument is that at Aberdeen he had a whole host of flair players, but when they all left, he had to rebuild the team, and he couldn't keep replacing flair players. But I digress. But yeah, that was Alec Miller. It was quite I mean, you know, of course he was doer. And then Jim Duffy arrived, or I can't remember. Jim Duffy came in a helicopter, didn't he? I thought it was quite stylish. But it was Jim Duffy who came out with. Jim Duffy came out with my most favourite ever expressions when it just in the weeks building up to him getting sacked by Hibs, and Jim signed a bunch of really good first division players, now championship players that couldn't crack it. I can't remember them now, but he brought guys in. They weren't good enough. He thought they were good. He'd seen them in the first division. And anyway, weeks before he got sacked, yet another defeat or yet another draw. And he just walked into the press room, and Jim Duffy said, "The nail gets sugglier and sugglier." And I just thought, what great way of putting it. And he actually, to be fair to him, he said it with a smile on his face. He was resigned to his fate, Jim Duffy.
Were you surprised that Jim Duffy did as badly as he did at Hibs? Because he was quite highly thought of when Hibs took him.
Yeah, and his ticket was hot, Jim Duffy, and he was highly thought. He'd been, I could never remember how many tours of duty he did as Dundee manager, but I think he did 3. And I think he went from Dundee to Hibs after his first tour when he'd done very well. I think that's can't quite remember. I think that was the case. So he'd done very well. His ticket was hot, and this thing that tripped him up was just rank bad recruitment. He just misjudged the quality of player he needed, and Hibs were no use under him. They had a quality deficit under Jim Duffy, and he went, "Oh shit! I saw that guy last year running amok in the whatever it was called then, the first division, but they weren't good enough for the Premier League."
I think he sort of marginalised Keith Wright as well. Keith Wright was still scoring goals for Hibs, and I'm sure when Duffy came in, he sort of had decided it didn't fit into his plans, and Jim Leighton as well. I think because of his experience, if I'm right here, Colin, you can keep me right. I think Jim Leighton had been under Duffy at Dundee and had a bad time with him. Right. Come to Hibs and sort of had rejuvenated his career. Obviously, it was spectacular at Hibs, and then when Duffy came back in, Leighton's card was kind of marked, and so we lost a really good bit of quality either end of the park when Duffy came in.
I think Duffy's one of the guys that, and I don't know, Graham, you can maybe keep us right here, but he's one of these guys that kind of got jobs or gets jobs because he's got friends in the media and they don't report maybe as harshly as they would. He's like a guy, he still pops up on Radio Scotland and that, 40 years after he was relevant almost, and it's like, and it's just because he's got good mates, you know what I mean? But it's like, that's Radio Scotland for you, isn't it? That's who's on Radio Scotland. It is Willie Miller, and it is guys that played when me and Matthew were at primary. Yeah, we've moaned about that on loads here. They were great players then, but it's a different game. Pass backs aren't allowed anymore and all that stuff. And I think he was good friends with Charlie Nicholas, I think, maybe at school or something. And
they were neighbours in Maryhill growing up.
And he just kind of got away with a lot, it was, or would get new jobs because of friends in the media.
The thing, I don't know, Colin, if that's strictly true, but there's probably a grain of truth in it. I mean, Jim's very personable and chatty, and he will always take a call from a journalist. It's just in his nature. And journalists tend to you know what? Not so much my end of the business, but in tabloid journalism, if you're desperate for a spread, you need a story, you need a quote, phone up Jim Duffy. He'll always come back to you. And he's good in that way. So does that make the media soft on him? Maybe. I do think as a coach, though, when he came to Hibs and he had many years in the top flight with Dundee, I do think that he was regarded within the game as a coach of some pedigree. He was a substantial coach who knew what to do on the training ground, knew how to set up a team, and knew how to change a game. That's how he was viewed anyway. And I like Jim Duffy a lot, but I do remember how hopeless his reign was at Hibs. I mean, rank hopeless, you know.
I think to Jim Duffy's credit, he spoke to is it Colin Leslie? Colin, the author of the Best to Beast. Was it Best to Beast or Best to Beast the Belgium book about Hibs, which covers Jim Duffy's time, and Jim came and spoke to him and did his part. So it would have been easy for him to sort of say, "No, I had a horrible time at Hibs," and just to ignore it. So credit to him for that. After Duffy, then we were on to McLeish, who couldn't quite salvage us from relegation, but built a really good team in the Championship. Graham, what were your experiences of Alec McLeish at Hibs?
Strangely enough, well, this might fit into the category of the Ouija media, but funnily enough, I got to know Big Eck very well, but I didn't really have many dealings with him at Hibs, and I think I know why. Because by that time I was chief sports writer of the Herald, and in that role you are just thrown into an Old Firm trench. You're just up to your neck in muck and bullets involving Rangers and Celtic and accusation and counter accusation. So I hardly I didn't have many dealings with Alec when he was at Hibs, and then of course when he came to Rangers I got to know him much better, and I had a lot of dealings with him. But I remember the perception was that he built a very attractive Hibs team, played very attractive football, and the compliment I always remember, and you guys probably remember this as well, was that Dick Advocat said he was my most difficult opponent in the dugout. This guy in a game, and in Holland, they do say that Advocat regarded a game of football like a game of chess. And he broke the 90 minutes into 10 or 12 or 14 different bits. Now, something at Euro 2004, the Dutch fans were irate with Dick Advocat for the way he went about games with this chess-like approach. But they said that's how he operated, and it was within that context. He said, he said to David Murray, "This guy's been my most difficult opponent across the dugout. So when I leave, go and get him." But I didn't really have many dealings with him.
That happened shortly after he said, what was the exact quote, Matthew? Keep me right, or something along.
I'm here for as long as you want me. Kind of thing, yeah.
Aye, that was it.
I'm here as long as you want me. It was words to that effect. That McLeish was out in the East pitch. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Okay, well, we've had a repeat of that with Michael Beale today.
Yeah.
QPR fans are irate with Mick Beale for saying a month ago integrity, loyalty, QPR, and he's buggered off at the first. Yes, that's right. That was he said exactly that. I'm here at Hibs as long as you want me. And then how was it? A matter of weeks before he was.
I think it was days maybe even.
So he's speaking about meeting in car parks and all that with him. I think it's came out since. Like that's how it was all done like that. But at the same time as he was doing that, he was saying, "I'm here as long as you want me." And you think, and I know the difficulty, like it might fall through and all that kind of stuff. But it's like such a blatant, not lie. But you know what I mean? It's boxing you into such a position that that's why there's a bit of sort of. It's probably all forgotten about now, really. But there was a lot of bad blood at the time, all the Judas stuff and all that he was getting. But that was how he boxed the sell in by saying that. But I mean, his team were good to watch. The Derby record was excellent as well, which always going to get you a tick in the box.
And he brought Soze and Latape to the team, and that was probably, I think, outside of maybe the golden generation, that was probably my favourite Hibs team ever. Just watching those two in particular were just outstanding footballers. And
it was Larson and Agat and all that.
Larson, yeah.
Who's the big tank that he brought from Colombia? Hurtado?
No, Eduardo Hurtado. It was, yeah.
He only came in because he was Dela Cruz's mate, I reckon. Like, he was pretty
Just
Right.
to help him settle.
Yeah.
He had a really
He
good
had something though,
reputation.
didn't he?
Yeah, I'm sure he was like the record scorer for Ecuador or something like that at the time, and he had a bit of pedigree about him, but we never saw it. I mean, he was awful. He still kind of gets quoted as a bit of a joke figure, doesn't he? The tank.
I think Alex said to me. Yes, I'm sure Big X said to me that one player that he really would have loved to have got at Hibs was Jean-Claude Darcheville. And I don't know if you know this anecdote, but now Darcheville came to Rangers 10 years later, not even signed by McLeish or I think Walter Smith brought him in 2010. Now, but when Big Ek was at Hibs played a pre-season friendly against a French club with this flying machine, a 19-year-old Darcheville, who really excited French football at the time. And Alex said to me that an agent who was at the game had said to him, I can bring this guy to Hibs. If you want this guy, I can. And Alex said, You're kidding. He said, No, I can, this guy Darcheville. And at the time he was young and raw and he had electric pace. He was more heavy set by the time he came to Rangers. But Alec, I remember telling me that he really thought when he wanted to bring exciting players to Hibs, he thought he'd get Darcheville, and it turned out that the agent was talking a pile of shite. He couldn't bring him at all.
Imagine the career Darcheville could have had then, if he'd made the move to Hibs. The world would have been his oyster.
Sosie was a magical signing, though, wasn't it?
Sosie was incredible. I mean, really, the pedigree that Sosie came with. I remember seeing it in the evening news that Hibs were signing him, and you're like, no way. And then the first game I saw Sosie, I'm trying to remember if it was a pre-season game or if he came mid-season. You just remember watching him. It was like on a different level from everybody. Even when we were up against Rangers and Celtic, Sosie strolled those games. It's like he wasn't phased by anything. The European games we went into, Sosie just absolutely cruised it. You could tell he just had that about him.
Yeah, I remember Chick Young on the radio calling him out as player of the season early, like in September, and everybody laughing at him. But Hibs fans thinking, "He fucking will be," you know. It's
not like Chick to rush to judgment.
No. But we agreed with him that time, so it was all right. That's how it works.
I know that's how it works. Yes. How it works is, now let me get this right. So how it works is these bastards in the media, they're total bastards. But if they say something nice about our club, we agree with them. For 5 minutes, we agree with them.
That's right.
You're all right there, isn't it? It's like you're one of the good guys until the next time. And there's an agenda.
But guys, do you know what? I mean, sometimes Big Ek across football became vilified, I thought, unfairly, or just not vilified, but disparaged. I wonder what it said about McLeish, that he managed to do that Sosie deal, and he saw it. He imagined it when a whole pile of other managers, it didn't enter their head, or they thought he'd be past it.
I'm sure there's a story they knew each other from international. I think they played internationally against each other at one point. I think that's how it came about, and he reached out to him or whatever, and Sosie was excited by the project that he had going, and so he was happy to come along. A lot of
Craig Brown
for a trial, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Which is even
Craig
more
Brown
crazy.
said to me that I mean, Matty, you've just reminded me of this. He said, of all the players that played for Scotland, Alex McLeish had this encyclopedic knowledge of all the players he was up against. He'd either played against them for Aberdeen and he remembered them and he knew how they played. And he also said in the international setup, he also had this incredible memory of players, strikers he'd faced and opponents he'd faced. Now, Frank Sosie was well known, so it isn't like exactly remembering some nobody. But nonetheless, I remember Craig said that was what was different about Big Ek. He built up this knowledge of opponents. Yeah.
Some players don't like football, really, do they? They play it because it's a job. You know, that they obviously liked it at one point, but there's others you read about that actually watch loads of football. Jimmy Carragher's another that he liked football. He would read 4-4-2 on the team bus and all that with others, or on their Xbox or whatever they would do. So he was sort of one of the originals of them. That
just on that score, Colin, I got Stephen Thompson at the BBC into terrible trouble because Tomo now presenting Sports Scene. Yeah, okay, and it caused a terrible fuss. I mean, he basically said to me, "Football bores me."
Yeah,
said, I can't be bothered watching.
He likes tennis or something, wasn't it?
He said the last thing I want to do in my downtime is watch a football game, and I was actually funny enough, I was on the train through to Easter Road on the Saturday morning about 4 years ago when this piece appeared in the Times, and Stephen phoned me and said, "Graham, I'm getting into terrible trouble over this piece you've written." I said, "Well, what is it? What is it?" Because I religiously record every syllable. I dutifully duplicate everything authentically and truthfully. I said, "Well, what have you said?" "Oh, this comment I made about how I don't like football," and he said, "It's the BBC are upset about it because I'm their pundit." And when he pointed it out to me, I could see how it would be discomforting for him. So yeah, he had a terrible 2 weeks, Tomo. He had to lie low and he was getting slagged off. But then about 4 months later, he got the Sports Scene gig. So I said to him, it was all down to my article. You got the Sports Scene
profile. Yeah.
Sports Scene is enough to make you more to football, though, like most weekends. So
I quite like Stevie. I like Stevie Thompson. He gets a hard time, but I think he's all right. He gets it. He does get.
I think he's good. Yeah,
I quite like him.
Yeah.
So McLeish went, Sosie came in. He was only in the door for, what was it, 19 games or something, Colin? Was it less than that? I can't remember.
Yeah.
We've only got 19
Didn't
games,
know him. All I know about him is that he was hopeless as a manager.
Yeah, didn't
hopeless
at all.
Do you know, back on the McLeish, the one thing I think he probably got wrong now is they were struggling. Remember, we won the cup final against Celtic 2001, and that was 99 years at the point. Or 98 or 99 it would be, yeah.
I think it was always, yes.
And it was like, we never got to 100. That's when Hearts fans started making a big thing about it, and that's when it became more I know it was always a thing, but, like once it got to 100, that's when it got it amplified.
Ridiculous.
And we were struggling with Sosie. He was injured. I think he played in the final, but he was toiling and he came off, and he sacked Latipi though. Remember, just like the 10 days before it.
Yeah.
Disciplinary thing.
Like, you almost think, just yellow carded him. When because Latipi was a bit of a magician, wasn't he? He maybe would not do very much for 8 minutes, but then he would just do something that would win you the match. And going into that final without both of them, I'm sure he would say that he regretted that because he then signed them at Rangers.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not like he's blotted his copybook that much. He's went to Rangers and signed them within. Like,
did they have to pay for him then, no, Colin? Did he? Like he was on a free?
No, I know.
Because he chucked them at Hibs.
And you just think, oh, what a mistake that was. Been looking at hindsight, but even hindsight at the time. I think that's when he might. Certainly one I regret that he made. I don't know about him.
So after Sosie, Bobby Williamson, did you have more to do with Bobby?
No. I only post match. I do remember Bobby. I got on okay with Bobby. The one big mistake I made over Bobby Williamson, and I've done this a number of times in my writing career, as a lot of writers have done, is in about 96, early season 96, 97. I wrote a piece, a really stupid piece now when I look back, wondering if this guy Bobby Williamson was going to be the next Sir Alex to come out of Scottish football. And then he won the Scottish Cup at the end of that season. I thought, you know what, maybe with this vibe I'm onto something, He might be the next hot ticket, the next great manager to go down to England. And he did pretty well at Kilmarnock. But the thing with Bobby was this animal, this thing just grew in him, didn't it? But this grim boar who didn't like entertainment, didn't like flair football. It just became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the one thing I remember about Bobby was him phoning me. I was at home living in the West End of Glasgow, and I can remember receiving this irate phone call from him. He was complaining about some column I'd written in the Herald. And he was really, I got on fine with Bobby, but he was absolutely furious about something I'd said. I couldn't give a monkeys. I am strangely, although I was the biggest coward all through school, I'd get beaten up by anyone. I developed this incredible hide as a journalist. I don't know where it came from. I couldn't give a shit. If David Murray, if anyone came on, I couldn't give a shit. And I told Bobby to pipe down, and I'd talk to him next week or the next time I saw him. I wasn't intimidated by him in the slightest, but I just remember this fulminating phone call. I'm trying to remember what it was. It must have been something to do with what he was doing at Hibs. I can't quite remember, but I thought Bobby had been at Hibs far longer than he was. Was he only there a couple of seasons? It felt to me like 4 or 5 years he was at Hibs. I don't think it was.
Didn't he?
March 02 to April 04. So just over 2 years.
And then he got, well, I think there was a bit of calls for him to go, but he got the job at Plymouth.
Yeah, he went to Plymouth.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they came in.
So he left. We got money. We probably got money for that, or to buy him out. But it was at the time. It was like, there was people were quite happy for him to go. I think. By the end.
He had a hard time though, didn't he? Because he came to Hibs at a time where the spending stopped, and we had to really, really cut back on the players. So he had players like John O'Neill who he couldn't play because if he played him, his bonus or appearance fees took him above our wage structure. I can't remember if that was when the TV deal collapsed or if that was later. But Hibs that's how the golden generation got their chance, because we couldn't afford to sign like senior players. It was pretty much play the kids or else. So he had quite a hard time.
And then Moga came in.
Mm-hmm. What did you think of Mowbray? He was a bit of a surprise for everybody.
Yeah, I loved this guy. Now, funnily enough, this was a Hibs manager at the time in situ that I got to know reasonably well, just because I found him really likable, and there was a time, unless my memory is playing tricks on me, there was a time when Hibs were really on a roll under Moga. I mean, really. I saw Hibs play brilliantly at Celtic Park. Either they came back, or they were down, or I can't remember. A thrilling game. And I was at the game. I was at the famous Ivan Sproul game at Ibrox, which was very funny in one way, because, that this is, for Rangers fans, this kind of atrocity is against the laws of the universe for a team to come and tank them in their own backyard, and even worse, to bring on this wee spiv from Northern Ireland to come on as a sub, and and I can just remember that day. Oh, the rancor. Nowadays the press box at Ibrox is down in the front row, but back then it was still right in the heart of the main stand, right beside the director's box. The rancor and the bile that was raining down on McLeish that day. Wow. Was that 05, I think? 2005? The 3-0 game. I think it was. Yeah. Maybe 04. Scott Brown played. Mikey Stewart played. Mm-hmm. Kevin Thompson. It was that kind of golden generation of young Hibs players that were,
Yeah, no, it was a good
Sproul,
period, that. Because we beat them.
O'Connor played up front.
Yeah, he came off for Sproul to come on.
Did he? Right, okay.
He said, what's he going to do?
That was just what's he going to do?
Boozy played.
Yeah, it was a great. We had Ivan on back in the summer, and he was talking about that one. He was saying that he was close to going home. Like he thought he hadn't get to have fallout with Boozy and that, and stuff, and he wasn't settling, and it was like, just give one more chance, and he came off the bench, scored a hat trick, and then never.
All right.
Never went back. Yeah, he was going to go back to, was it Institute? I think that or Linfield or somebody that were coming from.
Right.
Yeah. But there was a period there. I think we beat them 3 times in a row. Like, we never beat Rangers 3 times in a row. It was like 3-0 twice, and I think we beat them at Easter Road in between 2-1 maybe. Chris Killen scored as well. That was good times there as well. And wins at Parkhead. Mowbray was brilliant. We hark back to the Mowbray days lots on here, even though it was nearly 20 years ago. We talk about it. It was one of the 3rd place finishes we mentioned, but it was you look forward to going to the game. Like you can't win the league in Scotland, right? It's impossible. There's barriers in the way all over the place. So you want to be winning games, but you want to be winning games with a style, and that's why Aberdeen got rid of McInnes, because like they were winning games, but it was dull and the fans weren't enjoying it, so they weren't going. But under Mowbray, we got both. You know, we were winning games, but going up to Dundee United on Boxing Day and winning 4-1, you know, like bringing on guys off the bench that are scoring goals, Morrow and all that, and all the other Irish guys that we had, it was just brilliant to watch it most of the time until they did chuck in the odd, because there was a lot of young lads, they would chuck in the odd howler, you know, generally in semi-finals or at Tynecastle, unfortunately. But it was just great to go, like, to watch that.
Yeah.
Team.
I can imagine. I mean, he liked flair football. In fact, I think one of the oddities of Tony Mowbray's career has been that sometimes he's put, and you do get coaches like this, sometimes he seemed to put flair above the actual winning. You know, flair, it could only be Tony Mowbray got the Celtic job, wanted by Celtic, lauded by Celtic, Tony Mowbray attacking football. His West Brom team went down when he got the job. He'd relegated West Brom from the Premiership when Celtic wanted him. It kind of summed him up. You know, the West Brom fans had said that season 08-09, I think it was, or maybe 09-10. But anyway, in the English Premier League, Mowbray's West Brom played wonderful football, but they got relegated. Sums up Tony Mowbray, you know. I remember him... for some reason, I also remember, as well as the game at Ibrox, why do I remember this? He was part of he inspired a brilliant Hibs comeback at Fir Park when maybe they were 2-0 down. And there was a big bank of Hibs fans, a brilliant big bank of Hibs fans to my right. Maybe were they 1-0 down and then they won 2-1. Anyway, Mowbray had been getting a lot of stick from that main stand at Fir Park. And I always remember when either the Hibs winner or the Hibs equaliser went in, I can remember him turning round and kind of milking it from the Motherwell fans.
Was it like towards the end of the season, Sunny Day, Graham? Was it Conte scored an injury time, I think, to get
right?
Draw,
okay, they'd been trailing, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And I just thought, this guy, I like this guy's style. Something about Mowbray that was, and he was like McLeish. He was very personable, very likable. He did an unusual thing when he was at Celtic. Celtic went to play, just very briefly, they went to play in a Europa League match in Austria against Austria Vienna, I think. And Celtic were 3-0 down at half-time and being pumped. And Mowbray said at half-time, I'm not going to make any changes to this team. You've got yourself into this. You guys get yourself out of it. I'm not going to make any changes. I'm not going to take any of you off. And I think Celtic came back to either draw 3-3 or I think they drew 3-3. Quite an unusual manager in some ways, in lots of slightly. He wasn't conventional at all, Tony Mowbray. I didn't think.
I think the players loved him as well. That was one of the things that came through for that time. He's very
and
very
probably
close
went
to
against John
the
Collins.
players. Yeah,
when he came in and tried to be a bit harder on them. You know, like Mowbray was their sort of friendly uncle, and John Collins came in with the iron fist at times, you know, and made them do stuff they didn't want to do, whereas there was a bit of negotiation under Mowbray maybe, which caused, like, that's who's the next manager, it caused him more issues, I think.
It's a nice segue into John Collins there.
Try my best.
Colin, I like that.
Yeah.
Collins was started brightly. I mean, one of his earliest games, a win over Hearts in the League Cup quarter final.
First game, I think.
What, the first game? Yeah, which he then went on to win the Cup. Probably should have got to at least the final of the Scottish Cup that season as well. But a season that started off, or a tenure that started off really well, sort of ended very, very badly with the player revolt and everything. And what are your memories of Collins' time?
I remember the League Cup win. I remember the very young, exciting Lewis Stevenson coming through. I remember this beanpole striker that he bought from Norway. Collins, huge big guy up front who didn't last very long, but maybe he played at Ibrox. Huge big, dark-skinned striker who came from Norway or was Norwegian, and John Collins brought him to Hibs. 6'5", black-skinned striker who who had quite nice technique. And unless I'm talking, no, I'm absolutely right. He played for Hibs, Ibrox.
Antoine Courier. Well, I don't know. I don't think he was Norwegian. He ended up at Hamilton or somewhere like that.
All right, maybe that's who I'm thinking of.
Clayton Donaldson. He was not Norwegian. He was from
maybe it is Courier. I thought his name was double barreled. I don't know if Colin's quickly looking up Wikipedia. Okay. I can't remember.
Somebody will text us in. And tell
maybe
us
maybe it is Antoine Courier. Yeah, maybe it was him actually. But have I mistaken either his height or his skin color? I'm not sure. I just remember this tall.
It wasn't like a beanpole. Donaldson was taller.
Right. Okay. One of them anyway. But that's what I remember about John. Yeah. And then I remember just the whole narrative changing when I think he maybe felt he had to assert himself in an old-fashioned authoritarian way with players. And the way he went about it rubbed up the Scott Browns of this world and maybe Kevin Thompson and others, rubbed them up the wrong way. That's how I remember it being perceived.
Yeah.
That
they were looking for a move at the time, though. You know, they were handing transfer requests in, and they had Willie Mackay, the agent.
That's right.
Getting Keith Jackson to print stories in the paper under their name and all of that kind of stuff. And then he thought, I need to do something about it, and it was effectively picked on Kevin Thompson, the two, didn't they?
Took the captaincy off him and everything, didn't he?
Aye, to share it. But I mean, Tommy Craig was there as his assistant, and there was. See, this is where I'm going with the Jim Duffy getting away with it a bit, and Collins got hammered in the press, maybe because he was a bit aloof or perceived as arrogant and all that, because it still gets laughed about on the message boards and that. I think there was a press conference that Tommy Craig was standing near him with an apple, speaking like, you know how the players now do it with their hand over the mouth and that when they're on camera. He was doing it with an apple, and that still gets laughed about and all that. But that you know, it's like he's there as his mentor or whatever, but it does. I can get a look a bit rubbish, but I'm sure if that had been someone that wasn't John Collins, that wouldn't have been reported as sort of jokingly and in a piss-take way. But yeah, Tommy Craig could have done a better job looking after him. He was an experienced assistant manager, wasn't he?
I think John's definitely got an edge to him, because there were similar things. Do you remember there was a similar incident at Celtic with Chris Commons, where Chris Commons took exception to the way John was or what John was saying, infamously after a European game, openly haranguing John Collins when he was Ronnie Dyler's number 2. John definitely had an edge to him which rubbed some players up the wrong way. I like listening to John talk about football, but yeah, something in his personality made players object to him a bit.
The revolt that happened, that was like a big story at the time. Graham, had you seen something like that in football before, where the players went to Rod Peach's door and had a meeting about grievances they had with Collins?
Gosh, that's a good point. Off the top of my head, no. And that became a famous episode, didn't it? I mean, you do get players that turn against their coach, or you get individual players, but this was a kind of like a trade union en masse group going with a petition of demands and complaints. I mean, it really was quite remarkable that. I can't think of another. There was I can't remember. There was a French national coach. Oh gosh, what's his name? Who was a very academic guy about 10, 15 years ago, and the Zidane generation took against him and thought they went to the French Federation and complained about him, and the French media didn't like him. The silver, he had curly hair. He was an academic who actually he might have won a trophy for France. Can't remember, but that's the only other thing I can think of. The John Collins thing was quite the revolt was remarkable, and believe me, you mentioned Keith Jackson. I mean, it was tabloid fodder. It was gold dust and I know the whole story about Jacko and what was going on at Hibs, because I've heard all of that. But for the tabs in general, good, this stuff at Hibs was brilliant. It was absolutely dynamite. And yeah, both Brown and Thompson left. Yeah.
Brown stayed for till the end of the season. Thompson went in the January, the window.
Right.
But he got the cup before he went. It was really frustrating from a fan's point of view, because we were in the semi-final against Dunfermline. Well, I think Celtic weren't that great at the time. They got in the final against Dunfermline in the end. We had just won the League Cup, and it was in between the League Cup and the Scottish Cup semi-final, and you think, what a chance to do like almost the impossible, which St Johnstone have since done. But you know, the double cup, and they threw it away from a fan's point of view. And John Collins got us a lot of fan support at that time, and then he started signing players himself, because he had a lot of the remnants of Mowbray's team, because that would always be the thing. I won the cup, but I won it with Mowbray's team, but Mowbray never won a cup. You know, Mowbray never got past the semi-final. And that was so he got defended at first, and then he started signing players, and then it was like that was when everybody turned against him. I like John Collins; he was a great player as well, but it was disappointing the way it turned out, and the players did get a lot of flack at the time for it.
So I remember when you talk about his player, Colin, I remember I am just old enough, I must have been a young reporter at the time, when the 20-year-old or 21-year-old John Collins was just this gem of a young midfielder, and it was speculated he was going to leave Hibs, and he signed a new 2-year contract. And I can still remember the excitement. I remember.
We've got a current player that won't sign a new contract.
Yes, I know. And I can remember the Hibs fans thinking, this is brilliant. And he was pictured behind, you know, they became two rogues in the eyes of Hibs fans, but not, who was the managing director? Was it David Duff? No. Who's the other one?
Duff, so Duff and Gray.
Jim Gray, I think, was seated beside John Collins when he signed his new 2-year contract, and Jim Gray was glowing in the glory of having kept this young star at the club for another 2 years. You know, that's by the by. But I just remember he was a gem of a player.
He was a cracking player. John. So we're pretty much out of time. Just so we're not going to go through the rest of the managers, but probably one that sticks out, the biggest character probably that we've had in charge since then was Neil Lennon. How did you find Neil Lennon's time at Hibs? What were your experiences in Neil?
I've always liked Lenny. Like a lot of guys in my business, I've always liked him. I loved the way after that 5-3 game when he said, you know, when they were 3-0, he said we actually needed a fourth. You know, to be safe. You know, that crazy game against Rangers. Yeah. We needed a fourth.
That was an amazing
manager
day.
Say that.
That play, the extra road was bouncing like it very rarely has. Well, never since probably, but before that, hardly ever. Because we had a chance to go 4-0 up. That's what he was probably referring to. I think Whittaker
missed the header, and Rangers went out the park and scored.
Right.
Easter Road was absolutely bouncing, and the players started believing it. I remember McGinn like grabbing the ball after the third to get back to halfway to go for another. You know, it was like this. We're going to do it. That was the feeling, that was the belief that you got under it. It was amazing.
I saw Lennon a couple of times really, really give Rangers a game at Ibrox with Hibs. You know, the famous time he was photographed giving to the stand when he, you know, the thing about Lenny was, because he had that edge to him, I think that transmitted to his team sometimes. You know, he's got a lot of detractors, Neil Lennon. And I think unfairly, I think he was quite thoughtful about the game. I always remember the story Charlie Mulgrew told about when Celtic scored the opening goal against Barcelona the night they beat Barcelona 2-1. Charlie Mulgrew said to me, we scored an opening goal that night because Neil Lennon told us exactly what would happen at this corner. He told us exactly where the Barcelona players would line up. And Charlie said that Lenny said, Barcelona, for some reason, put Xavi or somebody small in the back post. Couldn't understand why. He said to Victor Wanyama, stand there. You'll have a foot advantage over Xavi. Charlie, swing it, curl it to the back post. Charlie Mulgrew said to me, we got this corner after 18 minutes. And I did exactly what Neil Lennon told me. And we scored a goal. And the goal occurred exactly as he said it would occur. Wanyama they had Xavi or somebody, Iniesta, somebody that was, you know, a foot smaller than Wanyama. And I think Lenny I don't know what Hibs fans think about this, but I thought Lenny was a bit more cerebral about football than people sometimes made him out to be an angry drill sergeant, and he could be that. But there were some really good times at Hibs, weren't there, under him? Some really good 90 minutes.
We had like a 6-month spell that was probably as good as any time that we've spent watching Hibs. It had like 2 consecutive weeks we beat Kilmarnock 5-3 and drew with Rangers 5-5. Consecutive home games, so how many domestic teams put 5 past Rangers? And even when Rangers weren't that great, it still wasn't something that happened very often. So, yeah, he was good in some big derby wins and everything. He's remembered pretty fondly by most of the Hibs supporters. He is a bit of a divisive character, but
comes up every time we sack a manager to get him back.
I wonder. I was just going to say, could he ever make a Hibs comeback?
I don't think so.
I think there'd be a lot of opposition to it because it's polar. You know, it's like there's those that would take every time we lose a couple of games. It's like get Lennon back and he wouldn't suffer feels gladly, and there's others going, remember the other 18 months though.
Aye.
You know, it was terrible, and it was. You know, it was like I've said it before. Like you go to Tynecastle, and we blew a chance of second place going to Tynecastle, and effectively just going, who's the 10 tallest outfield players? We'll play them, rather than sticking with the tried and trusted, where it was brilliant to watch. You know, McGinn, Allen, McGeoch, the 2 guys, Canberry, McLaren up front, and all that. You know, it was just brilliant to watch. And we went to Tynecastle that midweek, and we were like, why has he picked that team? And then we lost 2-1, I think.
And he slaughtered the players for it, didn't he, as well?
He did, and he went missing until the day of the 5-5 game when we needed to beat them 5-0 or 6-0 or something to get to second place, which it's academic anyway, because Aberdeen won at Parkhead that day, I think. So it was,
they did.
Yes.
We blew it in the midweek at Tynecastle, and it was he changed it. And you know, why did you do that? And there was other games you'd go to Kilmarnock, and it was like 6 or 7 defenders in the team, and you're going, what are we doing? You know, but yeah, I mean, from January to May, in his first season, it was
incredible.
Yeah.
When you talk about 6 or 7 defenders in the team, the Everton fans to this day talk about a team when Walter Smith played 8 centre backs in the Everton 11. The entire back 4 and the entire midfield 4 were all officially centre backs. And the Everton fans going up this. I didn't know Lenny had managed it with 6 or 7 kind of defenders, but
midfielders, and that was it. It was Stevenson midfield and all that. Like it was just. I think the lights went out in that game, and I'm getting texts from my mates at the game and that saying, "I hope they don't get them back on." Just leave them.
Floodlight failure was going to save us, and we weren't even lucky enough for that.
The journalists always said, you know, and it's true. They always said, "Oh, we get great copy out of Lenny." I don't know how many times that's been said because he would always say something. He would always say something or express a sharp opinion, and he was no Henry Kissinger figure, was he? If somebody was having a go of something, Neil Lennon's position was not to pacify. His instinct was to fight back and give as good as he got. So he was brilliant for sports journalists.
Yeah, and I liked that about him. He would hammer a referee, like rather than do the polite thing. You know, he would just be out there.
Yeah.
The guy at a Kilmarnock game, I can't remember Clancy. He just called him Clancy and all that. You know, and it's given a handball against Porteous, I think it was. It was never a handball and all that. And just like, and you think, good, somebody sticking up for us, because often our managers seem to just too polite about it.
It was refreshing. Graham, thanks very much for your time tonight. It's probably the fastest 3/4 an hour or 50 minutes or whatever it is that I've had all day. So very much appreciated. And I know you're off to record your own podcast after this.
Yes, I am. Yeah. No, it's been great to be on, guys. I like Hibs chat, so I'll happily come on again and we can talk about the managers we didn't get through. Notably Mr. Terry Butcher, who I've got memories of and interviews with, but we'll do that. We'll maybe do that another time early in the new year. But thanks for having me on. It's a great pleasure to chat to you guys. Thank you.
Fantastic. And if you stay tuned, we are, Colin and I will record Extra Time. This is our subscriber episode, and we'll be looking at the players that could leave Hibs for free in the summer. You can subscribe at our link on our profile on Twitter. Thanks very much for tuning in, Graham. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
County line, West upon. Well, they trailed me down when I broke free. I drank all the whiskey in Tennessee. I don't drink what I know